We do have an interim injunction here and at Crawford Bridge, but it is by no means all that UKOG wanted. It is at least in part a victory for Weald Action Group and Friends of the Earth and local campaigners like myself. It was worth fighting for and started out as the most wide-ranging draconian bar on peaceful protest yet sought in the industry. And we will be seeking permission to appeal.
Well done.
We were in court for 3.5 days in July, listening to the arguments on both sides. The case has been considered by Mr. Justice Mail QC, and he has published his findings. It's quite complicated and not clear, so we do recommend you get hold of a copy yourself. UKOG revised its injunction in line with the findings. We haven't seen the final version, so our response is to the judgment. The judge has granted the injunction at 2 sites, not the 4 that UKOG originally wanted. If we hadn't fought the injunction from the start, we might well now have a ban on lawful protest. UKOG say they didn't set out to quash a peaceful protest, but that's exactly what they tried to do with the order they first sought until we opposed it in court in March. That is a significant victory. During the hearing in July, they also abandoned their attempt to treat all direct action protest as unlawful. The judge agreed with Friends of the Earth that including watching and besetting are terms that are not likely to be readily understood. He said that they are archaic legal concepts which might be misunderstood in the context of lawful protests. And he removed the words assaulting and intimidating because there was no evidence of that happening at these sites. He was clear that corporations can't be assaulted, nor that UKOG and its suppliers have been subject to threatening and abusive communications. So he struck out one whole section of the injunction, which is a great result. UKOG was also aiming to gag all those organisations and individuals who helped support the fossil fuel campaign by spreading the word about protests and actions. Friends of the Earth came to court to fight that corner, and Keith Taylor, the Green MEP, also put in evidence. The judge concluded that this was going too far. This is what he struck out.
Right.
Any other person who knows of this order and does anything for the purpose of helping or permitting the defendants or any of them to breach the terms of this order may also be held in contempt of court and may be imprisoned, fined, or have their assets seized. I repeat, this is what was struck out. He also removed parts of the injunction that would make people liable for instructing and encouraging the acts of others, which again was very unclear and we believe was directed at organisations like Friends of the Earth and local action groups to deter them from campaigning, publicising and supporting opposition and protest. That is a significant line in the sand for our cause. Now we get to the protest actions which UKOG sought to include in the injunction. The judge struck out a number of them, but he left some in. You'll have to review the actual wording. On approaching contractors, the position is complicated. The judge has asked for a list of contractors rather than saying none could be approached at all. We are unclear as yet about the outcome of that. Our main concern about this is that it all remains very confusing. Who is going to turn up a protest with a list of do's and don'ts that differ for different sites and circumstances? This is nonsense. The judge said, I am satisfied that the prohibited conduct is sufficiently clear and certain. In this regard, it is to be borne in mind that all the claimants seek to do is to restrain conduct which is wrongful. They do not seek to restrain conduct which is lawful, such as lawful demonstrations on the public highway. This isn't at all clear and certain. The injunction as it stands leaves considerable uncertainty as to what is and what isn't allowed, And that is one of the things that is seriously wrong with it.
We have gained some significant victories, but there is still much that is seriously wrong with the injunction. So we will be seeking permission to appeal, as you've heard. It's all part of our fight against oppression by oil companies and restrictions on our rights to peacefully protest. Oil companies cannot be allowed to set the legal framework for protest in this way. Dissent is not a crime, and the penalties for breaching an injunction are severe. The judge referred to a famous comment by one of his colleagues, Justice Laws. Rights worth having are unruly things. Demonstrations and protests are liable to be a nuisance. They are liable to be inconvenient and tiresome, or at least perceived as such by others who are out of sympathy with them. We have expansion of oil exploration all over Surrey and Sussex, and companies which clearly will stop at nothing to silence people who object to their plans. We are sick and tired of being intimidated by them, either in the courts, at our protests, or on social media, or simply being photographed when we go about our business. We are local people who care about our environment and the threat of climate change. We will not be silenced by these bullying tactics. We want a low-carbon future, and indeed we cannot afford to want anything else, and that's worth fighting for.
Yay!